You read another book about this same dude?
Yes, I did.
But by a different dude, right?
Huh?
But by a different dude? Or is
No.
it by that same guy?
No, it's still by Kosta. It's still by Kosta, about the same kind of thing, but a bit more instructional this time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this book's called Nei Kung, The Secret Teachings of the Warrior Sages. Now I was curious about Nei Kung and like what that means specifically. And Nei Kung seems to mean something like internal power.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that Kosta brings up in this book that he didn't bring up in the previous book, Magus of Java, is that there seems to be sort of like two different like energetic systems in people. One of them is more external to the outside of the body.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be more what's relevant to like acupuncture. It's like these points on the surface of the body that seem to be energetically related. And then there's also a more internal force, which is the thing that connects to the dantian and to the main 7 chakras of the spine.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be that like cultivating energy related to the dantian is usually referred to as Nei Kung.
Mm-hmm.
So Mo Pai is like the school, the practice that they do specifically. And a part of Mo Pai is learning Nei Kung and also learning another term is Qigong. Like that's what's used in the Ring of Fire. They refer to him as a Qigong practitioner, which it seems like is kind of an oversimplified way to explain it. And that's like a kind of a smaller part of what Mo Pai is.
And Nei Kung and what Qi?
Qigong.
Nei Kung and Qigong are both subsets of Mo Pai? They're both within Mo Pai?
Yeah. I mean, it's like Mo Pai teaches both of those things. Like karate teaches kicks and punches.
Okay.
They're just like two things that you learn within that school of practice.
Okay.
And so this is mostly about that. So this book goes a lot more into like sort of the how-tos of how to do things. And one thing, I'm going to start off by reading this one section where he kind of explains what it is he wants to accomplish with these books. He says, I've always wanted to pass on to the general public what I have learned from John Chang. Indeed, the primary purpose of both this text and the Magus of Java is to coerce people to attempt a simple meditative discipline, the first step in a Nei Kung practice. It is unfortunate that John is oath-bound to teach only his own students, and that I myself am constrained by a similar promise. Thus, I can't spell out for you in detail what you probably most want to know, the specific psychoenergetic practices of the Mo Pai. Having made the decision to take on students, and having accepted the responsibility and karma of this decision, I am allowed to teach these practices only to those I work with in this capacity. As such, I screen people very carefully before consenting to teach them, a process that necessarily results in frustration for some. In a catch-22 that is typical of such endeavors, when John asked permission from his non-corporeal master to release his story and teachings to the world, the answer was something akin to, if you can do it in such a way as to get people to meditate, it would be a wonderful thing. If it backfires, however, or becomes a Frankenstein monster of sorts, you have to bear the karma for this result. In essence, Lao Sigong, and Sigong means something like grand teacher, like your teacher's teacher. Lao Sigong asked us to get the cart moving, but warned us that if an axle or wheel broke, we were in trouble. Hence, we chose to move carefully and with much forethought. However, we do have the leeway of pushing the envelope. I myself, being a Greek, will walk one step further and march right onto the line. If there is a court system in the afterlife, a good lawyer should get me off. Much of what follows in these pages has been approved by John, who really does want everyone and anyone reading this text to begin meditating. Study this book carefully. I have left clues strewn everywhere, and in the Magus of Java as well. If you can piece things together, good for you. Even Lao Sifu would be most happy. In this chapter, we will talk about 2 training... that's irrelevant. So he kind of just goes into the fact that what he wants to accomplish with this, what he would like to happen is for people to do more meditation, which is a little bit different than kind of the tone he had in the first book. I feel like in the first book, he was more interested in like, there's these powers, and this should be something that everybody should be practicing, and people should be like striving to move up these levels. And this should be something that's just like a part of culture. People should be doing this. And I think he's taken a step back from that a little bit, and he's now saying, and John seems to agree that he wants everybody to be doing meditation, which is basically step one of the process. That that's a safe thing, that it's not something you can mess up all that bad.
Yeah.
After that, at the higher levels, it can go bad. You can like actually hurt yourself, and there's instances of people like accidentally killing themselves because they're moving energy wrong in their body.
Wow.
And that can happen. So he seems to have kind of taken a step back there a little bit, and I thought that was interesting.
So when they're worried about sharing these teachings and the fact that that can go wrong, do you think they're primarily worried about people getting physically hurt by the stuff that they're messing with here? Or do you think that they're also worried about people using it with the wrong intention? Because I've like on the Christian side of magic, the Bible talks about the gifts of the Spirit and how people are capable of extrasensory things, and then it talks about how you shouldn't practice sorcery. So I always think about what exactly is the difference between engaging with the supernatural in a way that is advisable and in a way that's dangerous or for the wrong reasons or whatever.
Yeah.
Are they worried about a similar thing there, like the reasoning that people are doing it and what their aim is? Or are they just worried about people hurting themselves with it, you think?
If you would have asked me just after reading the first book, Magus of Java, I felt like it was mainly about the potential dangerous people learning these dangerous abilities and using them in the wrong way. But the sort of slightly more careful tone of this book kind of makes me feel like he's also now thinking about that. And he could have been also thinking about, or by that I mean the notion of people hurting themselves on accident. I feel like that's more on his mind now. So at this point, I think it's both. I think it's both of those things. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so as of the start of this book, it's like 6 years since Kosta met John. So he's been training with John, and it's still something he's been consistently doing.
For 6 years now?
Yeah. But he does say that he's a bit less like excited. He's a bit less gung-ho about it. He's a little bit older now, and he's a bit less excited about it than he was before.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that's kind of deliberate. Like that's what he needs in order to progress, is that you can't be in too big of a hurry because that can end up having negative effects.
Yeah. Or you can't be too attached or obsessed with the practice.
Yeah, he does use the word obsessed at one point, that he is like considers himself less obsessed with the training than he was before. And he seems to feel like that's a good spot that he should be at, though, at that point.
Okay.
But he does want to, well, then I guess at some point a little bit later, he's talking to John, and he's asking John what John thinks of him potentially selling his stuff and going to go live in the mountains for a while. And just because he wants to kind of emulate what John did, it sounds like, where John went and he lived in the forest. And
right, and that was where he talked to God.
Yeah, it was where he talked to God and went and saw the white wave and the black wave, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And John tells him, if you would have asked me that a month ago, I would have told you, go right ahead. I think that's a good idea, but now I'm less sure. And Kosta's kind of bummed about that. He asks what he means. John explains that a week ago, he went into a deep meditation and he contacted Lao. And this is weird because Lao is like, he's not only dead, he died in 1962. This is now sometime in the 90s, like 98 or something like that. So he died in 62. He
and then
hung
even
around.
Since dying, he passed from the immediate spirit world or afterlife into something even deeper, right? Like you said, he ascended to God or something.
Yeah. And he references at one point something, I think he refers to it as a stream. And the takeaway I got was that when John is contacting Lao, what he's doing is he's like asking a question into some sort of stream that I think might be the collective consciousness or collective unconsciousness. Consciousness, people say, right?
Collective unconscious is what Jung calls like the aspect of our psyche we don't have access to that connects everybody.
Okay. And I think that he's saying that there is something like that you can tap into that is, it's like ancient wisdom. It's like memories of people that have moved on, and it's something that you can tap into. Anyway, he contacts Lao somehow. I think it's something like that. And Lao, he's worried because at this point, John hasn't had any students pass level 4. Level 4 is where you're able to control yin as well. That's where you have yin and yang compressed in your dantian. None of his students have gotten to that point, and John's wondering like, well, why? Because it's getting a little frustrating because he's not getting, he doesn't have anybody that's like him at this point. He doesn't have anybody that can do anything like what he can do.
Yeah, so he feels kind of alone in it.
Yeah, and Lao tells him, well, more than feeling alone, I think he's feeling like a failure. I think he's feeling like he's not teaching well enough, and people aren't getting as good as he is, so like, what is he doing wrong?
Yeah.
And he asks Lao what the deal with that is, and Lao says that there's been a thing with the Mo Pai where each generation, and I'm not sure if this is really like this is just how it has to be, or if it's just like how it's been lately, but that with each generation there's only been one that's gotten past that point. John was that one, Lao was that one, his master was that one. So they've all had lots of students that make it to level 3, but they don't have anyone that gets past level 4. And Lao tells John that it isn't a matter of just will. It isn't like you just have to work hard enough and then you're going to get there. There is some sort of barrier at level 4 that is Jodo related, like the will of God. And only certain people are able to get to that point and are like allowed to do it. John contacts Lao. Lao tells John tells Kosta that everybody's got one of 3 types of auras: white, black, or yellow.
Okay.
White people are people
that won't work.
People with white auras are generally good. People with black auras are generally bad. People with yellow auras are special somehow, and they are able to be in balance with the universe. And it's only those people that are going to be able to reach level 4 and beyond that.
Okay.
Kosta wants to know, well, am I that guy? Am I the one with the yellow aura?
Yeah. Do I get a purple lightsaber?
Right. John says he doesn't know, and that he's really only able to see that when he says when he's at full power, like when he's out in the mountains, been out there for a month and is just talking with spirits all the time. That like at that point he can see something like that. So it sounds like the equivalent of seeing karma. But he can't do that when he's in the world. It seems to be a thing. It seems to be like your spiritual powers get more powerful if you're staying away from people. Maybe if you're just interacting more with nature and more with spirits, something like that. Yeah. But he can't really tell Kosta for sure. And Kosta feels dejected because he feels like it's probably not me, because at this point he's in his 40s. He's like in his mid 40s, and he feels like I'm an old guy. Like I'm a guy that's getting into this martial art that you've been training at since you were a little kid, and now I'm trying to get into it now. So it seems really unlikely that it is me. John tells him that that's not necessarily the case, which makes sense because there's stories of there's a few stories of like people living to like hundreds of years old, and it's because they've reached some sort of point in there. So if it doesn't seem like age is necessarily that big of a factor. Sometime after that, Kosta. At this point, Kosta is level 3. So let me go over the levels again, actually, because it talks a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So level 1 is meditation. You have to have 81 hours of complete meditation in order to fill your dantian with yang energy.
Yeah.
And that means that it's not just you have to sit there for 81 hours. You have to like enter into this meditative state, which he describes as something between consciousness or unconscious, something between sleep and awake. You reach it's said somewhere between concentration and relaxation, and he says that like there's a lot of different ways for different people to get there, but he does go over like some specific instructions on that, and I'll come back to that later. Some specific instructions with how to meditate, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
But after you've done the meditation, the second level is compressing the yang energy within your dantian. So that means it seems to involve a meditative practice where you're focusing on your dantian, and there's some sort of breathing and muscle technique that it actually like physically compresses it, because the dantian is some sort of physical thing.
When you were talking earlier about the 2 different energy systems or something in the body, it sounded like the dantian would be in the inner energy system as opposed to the physical. So it's interesting that a physical motion would have an effect on it. You know, it's saying that your chakras exist in like in a metaphysical energy system that isn't your physical body, right? It's something like your spirit body or your light body or your soul or whatever that is.
Well, the Dantian's, no, it's physically, like it physically exists as well. At least in someone that has already compressed the yang energy within it, you can, like I mentioned, you can see it in an X-ray.
Yeah.
It shows up there, and it has physical mass, and like if you put your hand on someone's stomach that had control over it, they could push on you with their yang. It has physical mass. And
So is it something that manifests as physical when you reach a certain point in your development, in your spiritual development, that it becomes physical in your body? Because obviously,
that
if you
seems
X-ray a
right.
random person, you know, you're not going to see a Dantian. So
Yeah, that seems right. It must be that you have to have it compressed before it actually seems to have physical mass and before it's something that you can see and observe.
but there's physical compressions and muscular contractions that you're supposed to do to get it to manifest to that level too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and I wanted to clarify about those sort of like two systems I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of them is more or less physical than the other.
Mm-hmm.
They're both kind of both. It sounds like they're mostly spiritual, but they do have some impact on physicality, and there seems to be some relation there. But the Dantian is a part of the inner system, which is like unrelated to not completely unrelated, but the exterior energy flow is where the acupuncture points are, and that's what's used for that, and for certain powers, I guess, within Mo Pai. So the Qigong related powers, it seems to be more related to that exterior system.
Okay.
And so I don't have a total grasp on some of these things,
Right.
and it's really because it's on purpose, because he doesn't want me to have a full grasp, like reading through it 1.5 times to
Yeah.
actually totally understand it.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're kind of physical as well, and
Mhm.
the Dantian at least exists physically.
Okay.
But that process of compressing the qi, compressing the yang qi in your Dantian is level 2, and it sounds like you pass that level when you've now got twice as much yang in your Dantian.
Okay.
So it's doubled. One thing that he talks about a bit is that you have to be celibate, basically, in order to do it, or at least you can't have an orgasm. That makes you lose your power somehow. He refers to, in Magus of Java, he talks about Ching, which I think means essence, and the Chinese usually associate it with like sperm, I guess, and that somehow losing sperm like makes you lose some form of energy, and you need to retain semen in order to better compress yang qi in you.
Okay.
He talks a little bit about like the struggles with this, that like it's been annoying, and that he doesn't always stick to it rigorously, but sort of the rules at this point as a man in his 40s is that he's allowed to have an orgasm once a month.
Really? He's married, right?
No, but he does have a
okay.
girlfriend. But he mentions that like it's a really, because he talks about like, well, I mean, there is always the option of doing like non-orgasmic sex, but that's a really frustrating thing for you and your partner, which I'm sure would be like a really annoying game to be playing all the time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that is something they gotta do. That's where it goes.
Non-orgasm sex.
Yeah.
And then they drink water, but they just spit it out. They just put it in the spit it in the sink.
I don't think she's practicing, so I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if it's even the same for women, because that seems very physiologically different, and you're not like losing as much in the same way. I don't know.
I'm not a female orgasm scientist.
So, anyway, he kind of complains about that a little bit, and he says that like when he does have his one a month, that like after that he feels pretty much at 100% the next morning, but he's been told that you shouldn't train for 3 days after that, and he does that, so he takes that break. But it seems like by having an orgasm, it weakens his powers, and he says that like if I really go for it, like 3 times in a night, then he like loses all his Nei Kung benefits. He's like not a super guy anymore.
Wow.
For
Just
a
drains
while.
it completely?
Yeah.
Wow. For how long?
He just said for a while, which was a little vague. I'm guessing a couple weeks, something like that was what came to mind when he said it. Yeah.
It must vary.
Yeah.
Depend on depending.
Depending on a lot. Depending. So after level 2, after you've got it compressed, well, and that part isn't just a level 2 thing, because he's level 3 at this point, and it's still something he's got to deal with. I think that's just a cost of getting these sorts of powers. You got to sacrifice that. Level 3 refers to there's apparently 5 strings that have a spiritual and a physical component that hold the dantian in place. The 4 strings seem to come out diagonally. If you're looking at someone from the front, they come out diagonally, the 4 corners. And then the last one seems to come straight through you somehow. I don't know if it's in front or in back or both, but it comes through you this way, perpendicular to the others. The 3rd level involves some sort of pulling at those 4 strings to break those, to like sever those cords. And by severing those cords, it sounds like it's risky. It sounds like that can hurt you. But if you can do it correctly, then your dantian becomes like much more free to move around your body. And by doing that, when you get to the point where you're able to sever those 4 threads, that's like the completion of level 3. That gives you the ability to do like kind of super punch things. He also mentions that anyone that reaches and can complete level 3 are granted some sort of spiritual gift, which I think is interesting because that's something that's talked about in the Bible a bit, the notion that everybody has some sort of spiritual gift. And he mentions as possible options like prophecy, seeing 6 months ahead was one example he gave. And he said that some people get like the ability to just heal certain diseases, but it sounds like not in the way that John does, because what John is doing is more of it's like he's more of a doctor. He like understands physiology and he is fixing things and he's correcting things in your body. But it sounds like when he says this spiritual gift, it sounds more like a faith healing based operation. Hey, your cancer's gone and it's gone because you willed it. So yeah, he mentions that everybody gets spiritual gifts if you can get to level 3. And that's where he's at this point. He's at level 3. And at this point, he talks a bit about like what he's capable of now that he's at level 3. He mentions that his power level is a lot higher than other people's. And once the cords of the dantian are cut and it's just sort of freely in you, it seems like it has more will. Like he almost describes it as like having a mind of its own, and it like makes decisions. He says it's a lot more affected by emotions. And so he has to be really careful to like control himself, because if he gets scared, and he tells a couple stories of like times that he got uncomfortable and nervous, and he says that he can feel that his dantian's just like letting it go, and he feels at full power. Like when he was describing it, it made me think of like Dragon Ball Z characters getting like the aura around them when they start yelling, that kind of thing.
So his dantian's getting more powerful?
Yeah, like he's getting more powerful through having this additional yang qi in his body. Because he has much more yang qi than the normal person, he's much more powerful that way.
Well, but I'm saying when he's emotional specifically, he gets more powerful?
Yeah, it sounds like the yang qi in his dantian is maybe dispersing through his body. It's something like that. So he's like, it's actually getting, instead of just being in the storage unit that is the dantian, some of it's being allowed out in order to power him up for whatever he might need to do.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I mean, it's a lot like, it sounds like just a bigger version of something that happens to people normally. Like if you feel threatened, then your adrenaline starts going, and like your reaction times get faster, and that just happens naturally in any person.
And it's not something you have control over. It is like the adrenaline has a mind of its own, and it's like, all right, here's what we're doing. And
yeah, and this, it sounds like he's kind of the same way, but it's just a lot more intense for him now because he has more of this like almost fire in him. Because the yang qi is associated with fire, and it sounds a lot like just having this fire in him. And I actually wanted to read I thought this was a really good description of yang and yin qi. Good summary of it here. It's called Poles of Forever, is this little chapter. There are two principal forces that make up our universe. The Chinese call them yin and yang. These two energies oppose each other continuously, locked in eternal combat. The yin is the primal chaos that existed before our own space-time was created. It is beyond form and function, incomprehensible to us, and yet an essential part of our being. Gravity, for example, is part of the yin field, as are black holes, as are our very souls. Yin is vibration, the interstellar cold of outer space. It is winter and night, sleep and water. And yet sleep and water are a necessary part of life. Without them, we die. The yang energy is solar fire, the driving force that opposes gravity and creates space-time. Without this contrasting dynamism, the force of gravity would have long ago collapsed all matter in the universe into one huge, solitary black hole, in essence ending creation. It is the yang force of solar nuclear fusion that propels space and time and first enabled us to live in the form we have now. The yang fuels our lives. It is the positive that gives direction, the light that drives away the darkness, the sum and substance that gives us joy. So, at this point, he's level 3. And in addition to having this sort of, I was going to say about like his power level where he's at now. He's always has to be really careful when he's training martial arts with people because he can like accidentally throw people too far or like hit people too hard.
Yeah.
At one point, he mentions that he caused a mild heart attack in somebody by hitting them slightly too hard.
Wow.
And he goes into the mechanics of this a little bit. Apparently, the heart, like in the spot where the heart is, there is also sort of a corresponding spiritual element of that acts as something that kind of pumps energy, yin and yang, through your body. He says that Mo Pai practitioners, in some cases, if they hit each other hard enough, what will often end up happening is it doesn't end up hurting the spot that they hit. It ends up traveling through the channels up to the heart and attacking the heart. And people will frequently die of heart attacks when being hit by someone with a lot of qi. Yeah, so he has to be really careful with that.
Wasn't there a scene like that in Kill Bill?
Oh, you're talking about the 5-fingered thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I bet that's certainly qi based because it's a very kung fu movie, and that's a very kung fu move. But yeah, what she does is she hits 5 points on his body within a second or something like that, and then she tells him if you take 5 steps, your heart explodes.
Yeah, the 5 steps part might not be exactly realistic.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, that's very similar to that sort of thing. He mentions that a couple of his co-students that are at the same level, he heard 3 stories of students that were getting mugged and accidentally killed their mugger because they got hot and they hit him too hard and it killed him. He also, at this point, he's like pretty telepathic. He'll be in conversations with people and he will often get what he says is like the top thought, or like the upper thoughts. Like he sort of describes it as like he can't read their minds totally, but sometimes he gets some insight. And like, I know the thing you're thinking about the most actively right now. He's also much more empathic than he used to be. He can like feel people's feelings when he's around them and know what people are worried about. And he even ends up in people's dreams a bit. One of his students came to him and told him this story about like how they met in a dream. But for Kosta, he's like, no, I really did that. I was meditating and I like communicated with you somehow.
Wow.
And it didn't seem like he understood how he did that exactly. Like it wasn't something he was deliberately doing, but in his meditation, he ended up having that conversation there. So he doesn't have a ton of control over it.
Do you know if it happened at the same time, like the same time he was in the meditation, the student had the dream, or were they at different times?
It was same time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was meditating when that person was asleep. Yeah. He also has a better sense of like spirits. He tells a story of like going to one of his friend's houses, and his friend's kid had been like in and out of ICU for the first year of his life, like this baby. And he said that when he walked into the house, he could immediately sense that there was a ton of yin energy, and that a lot of times when people are talking about when people are talking about like sensing a ghost in a place, what they're feeling is a field of yin energy that's coming because the ghost is there. He describes that a little bit as like what the practical feeling is, and he says that there's like that notion of like the hairs standing up, the chill on the back of your neck. He thinks that that is a very real thing. That's not something that's just in people's heads. That is oftentimes that.
Yeah.
He mentions that sometimes when he feels the presence, at one point when he feels the presence of a particularly powerful spirit, he says he feels a pressure in between his eyes and a pressure on the back of his neck. So yeah, he's just like notices spirits more. He can't communicate that with them in the same way that John can, but because he can't conjure them in the same way to make them somewhat present. But at one point he goes to like a shrine of, I think his name was Saint Ephraim, and he goes to this shrine and he says that like right when he got there he like felt that, and he had to sit down because like he felt this intense pressure on him. He said that people that have a lot of yang qi look weird to ghosts, and that ghosts notice those people that have an exceptional amount of energy and like tend to go to them and talk to them.
Did it say anything about kids being more susceptible to seeing ghosts?
Well, I do think he has a sense that is somewhat true. So at one point he's with his girlfriend, and one night they watched The Sixth Sense. And in The Sixth Sense is about a kid that can speak to ghosts.
And see them and everything, right? Like they're really there.
Yeah, he sees them completely like they're physical people. He might not totally, but yeah, that's at least with most of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
After he watched that, he went to bed that night. He said he woke up in the middle of the night with like a terrible revelation, and that he went outside and he ended up talking to his girlfriend about it. But what he feels is that organized religion has stolen spirituality from us. What he feels is that what's happened is communities used to have shamans, or like people that were comfortable with the spiritual world and were able to communicate with the spiritual world. And that as a result of organized religion, and he's talking about Christianity mostly, that like those people were called pagans, or were called devil worshippers, or
sorcerers, or whatever,
all sorts of things. Yeah. And those were gradually pushed out for this more big group controlled thing of priests that weren't interested and didn't take seriously the spiritual side of things. And what he feels is that this is something that's been, I think that he feels this is something that's been done deliberately by a group that wants to lessen us and wants to disconnect us from that whole world as much as possible and ground us as much in the physical as possible.
So we're easier to enslave.
Yeah, just to weaken us. Yeah, so we're easier to control. Totally. Yeah.
Interesting.
He does mention that he thinks that like probably a lot of people see things and feel things that are completely real, but because of the climate we live in, they're told like that's impossible, so it's more likely just that's a delusion and get rid of that.
Yeah.
Because this climate, people, and then that becomes a thing where people impose that on themselves. People impose, like, just brush that away. I let my imagination run wild or whatever because I was thinking about someone or whatever.
Even the concept that the imagination isn't real is really strange. Like that idea seems more and more strange to me. That the experiences that you have that don't take place in your immediate physical environment are all called imagination, and none of it is real. But everything,
I guess because no one can control that, because in the physical world, other people can have control over that. So then, those experiences are more objectively accepted.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the spirituality, they want people to they want people to be as not aware of that as possible. And he does mention something about kids being like more in tune with that. He mentions something about that. But I think just in the context of it, it doesn't seem like he necessarily thinks that kids are like actually more capable of it, but just that they are less brainwashed, or that they've been less told that this doesn't exist, so they're more willing to entertain the fact that it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it seems like really fucks him up, and he's really upset at this notion that like they took shamans from us. We don't have shamans anymore.
So he starts thinking about it, getting stressed out.
Yeah, yeah. And if we did have the shamans that we used to have that were in touch with spirits, not just ghosts, but also like spirits of nature, we would be much better off for it. Knowing, wouldn't it be so much more? It would be so much less scary to die if we all just objectively talked about the black wave and the white wave and what things can happen to you after you die, and the fact that regardless of what happens there, there's something after that. That at least it's not an end.
Yeah.
And if we all like comfortably discussed that, it would be really good for us. And so it was really sad for him to realize that.
Yeah.
But also shamans would communicate with spirits, like earth spirits, nature related spirits. He discusses that a little bit, that like there are spirits that are not the ghosts of people that lived, but are just entities that are solely yin, that are a different kind of thing.
That don't physically incarnate, but just stay on the other side.
Right. They just don't have a physical presence.
Or maybe like aspects of nature are their physical incarnations.
Yeah. So that leads me to something else. So after the Sixth Sense thing, that's sort of like a tipping point for him. That he decides to actually go off into the forest, and he's going to go do that thing after all. Although not as extreme, because he has one of his students one of his students built this cabin on this. It's in a mountain in Greece, out in the middle of nowhere. There's like some villages nearby, but he builds a cabin on top of this mountain. And his student is going to sometimes use it for retreats, but he's like, yeah, sure, you go use it for a month or whatever. So he goes off into the woods, and he lives in this cabin for a month. And this cabin is on a mountain that everybody says is haunted. And he talks to like a couple of the locals that like warn him away from staying there because it's too scary and it's dangerous. And they like sort of are, they're sort of beating around the bush a little bit and not straight up saying like, I'm pretty sure it's haunted up there.
Yeah.
But he tells them like, it's okay, I'm friends with them. And he just, because he can like read that, like, I know you're thinking about ghosts, but just so you know, I'm not tripping about ghosts.
Yeah.
I'm fine. So, and on this mountain, it sounds like he does see some spirits. He doesn't see them, but he's just aware that like, it's not even a very interesting thing to him at this point. He's aware when spirits are around, but it is what it is. Whatever, there's a spirit. Okay. At one point, though, he goes to sleep, and he mentions also that he's a big lucid dreamer. That some part of this training also lends itself to making you really good at lucid dreaming. And it kind of makes sense, because it's like, lucid dreaming is also something that's somewhere in between sleep and awake. It's somewhere in between conscious and unconscious.
Right.
Well, no, it's like conscious of your unconsciousness. Something like that.
Yeah.
So it lends itself to that. But this isn't a lucid. Well, it's kind of a lucid dream. Yeah, it is a lucid dream. He ends up in, he says, a dark place. And in front of him, he sees like tons of beings. But there are two that are out in front. And he talks with these beings, and these beings are called the King of the Mountain, and the other one he just refers to as the Queen of the Mountain. And they're what he refers to as earth elementals, and they're spirits, and they're spirits of this mountain. Now, I should back up a little bit. A little bit before this, about a week earlier, it sounds like, he was meditating, and he heard a loud explosion. He ran towards it, and what he found was that there's like excavators. There's people that are blowing up the mountain with dynamite so that they can get to metal veins that are running through there. So they're trying to get to the metal, and they're blowing up the mountain to get at it. So he goes and he sees that, and he contemplates going down there and like killing everybody and destroying shit, but he decides not to. Anyway, in this dream though, the earth elementals come and they talk to him, and basically what they tell him is like, what the fuck's going on? Hey, like, you seem like someone we can talk to. And they say something about how they haven't come to a person in a very, very long time. That like nobody goes there, so they've never communicated with a person that would be capable of communicating with them in a long, long time. And the earth elementals are like, they're scared because they feel like they're going to die, because it feels like people are killing them, and they are, because there's actually like there's a face in the mountain, which is what people refer to as the king of the mountain. And so they do refer to like this physical monument that the spirit seems to be attached to. And there's a kind of Japanese spirit that he talks about that's a very similar sort of thing. I think they're called kamis, and they're like attached to nature as well. They're like attached to a certain boulder, attached to a certain tree, and it's this some sort of consciousness that's associated with aspects of nature. Anyway, he talks to the earth spirit, and they basically tell him that they're scared and they need his help. And he says, like, I don't really know what I can do, but I'll look into it.
Yeah.
And then they end up chatting a little bit about people, and he like tells them that like because they're confused, like why are people wanting to hurt us? And Kosta's like, they don't even think you exist. Like, nobody knows about you. People don't live near as long as you do. And it's been a long time since people believed that you existed. So he's like a very strange person that he even is acknowledging that this could be a real thing. They talk for a little bit, and they're bummed, but they tell him like, thank you for your help. And they refer to him as shaman. And that seems to be a weird thing for him, because he doesn't consider himself a shaman, because he considers a shaman to be is somebody who can commune with spirits, someone who has like the natural gift to commune with spirits. And what he says is he's heard this referred to as people with yin eyes, people that can see yin. And he says that he thinks that the kid in Sixth Sense is an example of someone with yin eyes, someone that has the gift to be able to just communicate with spirits. But
and is he saying that people with yin eyes see spirits as though they are physically there, or do they see them in a sort of psychological way that we would categorize as imagination?
He definitely means eyes. He definitely means with their eyes. But I don't know if they would appear exactly like we appear, or if they would look spectral, blue, see-through kind of thing. I don't know, but they do see them with their eyes. And he has kind of seen them with his eyes. When he was with John, he like in the edge, he said like in his periphery. Oh, and you know what? He talked about this a little bit too when he was discussing like that in his periphery he could kind of see it. He felt at that point that eyesight was yang somehow, and that maybe on the outskirts of that someone without yin eyes can see a spirit in the side of their eyes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's what I was just thinking, was that I was just thinking maybe our physical eyes are the yang eyes, and the way that some people see spirits is, it's like something akin to imagination allows them to perceive that there is something there. They don't physically see it, but they can still perceive it in a way that isn't physical, which is hard to describe.
I get what you're saying. You know, like, it's not the vision itself, but there's some piece of data in their brain that's like inserting them in post into the image.
Yeah.
It might be something like that, but it seems like Kosta doesn't think so. It seems like Kosta thinks it's just legit sight is what it is. So yeah, he ends up talking with those spirits, and what he ends up doing is that he ends up like raising a stink about it locally, like in papers and stuff. He's like going places and getting, I think he's doing like signatures and stuff. He's just making some sort of just doing a regular person way to convince people to save nature. This is a part of our history, all that.
Yeah.
And he says that it works. Like, they do stop, but he seems pretty pessimistic about it, because it's just a matter of time before they're going to want to come back to it, before they're going to want to come back to getting that metal out of that mountain.
Yeah.
We're going to run out of resources, so they got to come from somewhere, and they get more and more valuable as time goes on.
Right. So
a big thing for Kosta with doing this, and this was more his attitude in Magus of Java, was that he wants to save the world. He thinks that this sort of knowledge of this sort of thing is what we need, because he sees that we're going down a bad path. He thinks that like humanity's going down a bad path. He thinks that we are close to the end times and we need to turn it around. So he's hoping that this kind of information would help with that. Yeah. Yeah, he does save them for now. He saves the forest spirits for now, and he ends up leaving. He ends up talking about
That's
metal.
quite a side quest.
Yeah, yeah. He ends up talking about metal quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about the notion that our bodies are a microcosm of the macrocosm that is the earth, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of similarities to how we function. And he relates the way these earth elementals function. He believes that this vein of metal ore, which is like how metal my understanding is like how metal is like in veins on the earth. Evan, is that right? Metal's like in veins, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amongst the rocks.
Yeah, yeah. So that those veins function as like energy, like as an energy flow, uh, like just like how electricity can pass through metal.
Mm-hmm.
That this chi energy can pass through metal better than it can through other mediums. And he talks about like how we need to have iron and nickel in our blood in order to like make it function correctly, in order for the energy to flow correctly, which is interesting because like what if like people that are anemic, what if it's not just a matter of like it's not just a blood problem, it's like they're low energy because their chi is not flowing correctly because they don't have enough iron in their blood for the chi to attach to.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that that's what's happening with people that
Yeah.
that aren't getting enough iron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when we're tearing out those veins out of the earth that are conductors for necessary energies for
Mm-hmm.
the earth is like bleeding out basically.
Yeah. And things like those earth elementals die if they
Mm-hmm.
get disconnected from that metal vein that is attaching them, I believe, to the core of the earth, is the notion. He talks a bit about earth cores and about how there's like high nickel and iron in the cores, at least of our planet, but
Mm-hmm.
probably on other planets too.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, you remember the kerases, that type of special dagger in Indonesia?
Yeah, that are possessed.
Yeah. Those at one point John and Kosta are at like a flea market and someone's selling kerases, and John mocks it because he's mocking the materials that they used,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a thing these people they were trying to just take nickel and iron, and they were trying to make the kerases just out of that. Apparently, you can't just take nickel and iron that you'd buy at the store and make a keras out of it. Not that you buy, I don't know where you buy nickel and iron, but at
Me
some
neither.
at a store somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, instead, you need to have nickel and iron that comes from a type of meteorite. And he says that this is because these are meteorites that were once a planet core or something like that. They were at the core, they were extremely dense metal that was highly pressurized.
Mm-hmm.
It's also highly energized with yin. So this type of metal is extremely conductive for yin energy. And because of that, those possessions can take so strongly to those kerases where they can't if it was made out of something else.
Okay.
Yeah, so apparently you have to have the right kind of metal in order to make that work. Mm. There's a story of a guy he met named Bobby. Bobby was a translator. He spoke perfect Mandarin and perfect English. And at one point, I think he was in China with John, and he got a second alone with Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to ask Bobby about this really widespread story everybody knows about him. Bobby died for a week, and then when he was about to be cremated, started pounding on the door of his coffin and got out. And Costa says, like, I know that sounds crazy,
Mm-hmm.
but if you look into this, he's a real guy. This is a real story. You can go find him if you want, and he'll tell you the story himself. He doesn't make a big effort to like try and prove like here's all the evidence for the fact that this happened. He's just like, it is what it is. If you doubt it, you go try and find it out yourself. But
Yeah.
this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to share the story
Dope.
of what Bobby said happened when he died.
You go to the white wave or the dark wave?
We'll see. Okay, so Bobby is a negotiator, or
Mm-hmm.
he not when this happened, he was a police negotiator, and so
Mm-hmm.
they would call him in to come like talk people off of balconies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So at one point, he meets a priestess, and this priestess, he goes to a Buddhist temple. He's not real religious, but this day he said he just felt like going to this monastery and putting down some incense. He thinks that maybe it was a premonition that he didn't understand. But he meets a priestess there, and the priestess pulls him aside, and she says that she sees something dark and heavy over him, and that he's going to die, I think, the next day. And he believes her. He takes it seriously. And
Mm-hmm.
he goes home and he calls and he tells his boss, like, I can't come in today. And he tells the story honestly of like what it was that happened and that he's not going out right now. Uh, but the boss ends up talking him into it because he's the only person available to do this job right now. And we need someone to come talk this person down. So what are you going to do? So he goes and he does save this woman. And then right after that, he gets hit by a car.
Hmm.
He says, like I said, I felt nothing. I woke up to find people swarming all over the accident scene. I tried to talk to them, but no one would answer me. I saw my partner and the woman standing there and thought, good, I managed to save them. Then suddenly I was bathed in light. 5 colors came to greet me. They were incredibly bright, but somehow you could look at them without pain. Yellow, green, blue, red, white. They all shone down on me. Then, without warning, I was in the real light. It's white, but cannot really be labeled with a color. Call it bright. It is bright beyond the sun, but that brightness does not hurt your eyes. All I knew was that I wanted to go into that light, and I realized that this light was not somewhere outside myself, but rather within my own heart. It resides within all our hearts. The light connects us all. There were many people standing in the light with me, going into it one by one. They were all naked. I looked down at myself and saw that I was naked too. There were several really beautiful girls around me, but I had no interest in them. I had what I felt like was a child's innocence. It was then that I knew I had died. I realized that we are born into the world naked and exit the world naked as well. We take nothing with us but our innermost thoughts and feelings in the end. I was ready to go into the light myself, when suddenly Huang Ti, the holy emperor of the Chinese people, appeared before me and told me that it was not my time yet, that I had to go back. I don't know if it was really Huang Ti or a spirit that had taken the shape to make me feel more comfortable and to get my attention. He told me many things that I am not at liberty to discuss. He stroked my hair and said he would be waiting for me later. Then I was back on Earth. I couldn't move. I realized with a start that I was inside a coffin. I could only move one hand, so I began to bang on the coffin's lid again and again. After a time, I heard a little girl's voice. I tried to shout, but only a strange noise came out. Somebody screamed. The lid was opened, and I saw people staring at me. So he finds out that he was going to be burned, that like there's a Chinese tradition of waiting a week before you burn someone, and he was on his way to get burned at this point. So he
Wow.
barely just in time.
What was the point of the 1 week tradition, just in case they come back to life?
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if Taoism is something that's big there, this might be a Taoist idea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
I've heard that people used to be buried with strings connected to bells in their coffins in case they woke back up, and in Indonesia they still are. I had a friend that just did a year mission in Indonesia.
Wow.
They still are buried with bells, but
Whoa.
it's not just because of their spiritual view that people can resurrect. It's also because of how unadvanced they are medically that sometimes they just ain't right about the fact that fool's dead.
Yeah.
They went into some sort of shock or something that made them look dead, and they bury them, and then the guy's like, "What? I'm fine," and rings the bell.
Jeez,
I don't know
that'd be
how
the
often
worst.
it happens, but they're still,
If it's one, that's too much.
yeah, 1 out of a million is a
Yeah,
lot.
That's a lot. But he he comes back to life. He has to go to the hospital. He's got a bunch of injuries from the car crash that nobody bothered to do anything about because he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
So now he has to go to the hospital and get like put back together. He's got a broken arm, 2 broken legs, but he eventually recovers. And he says, "And you know what is the truly astonishing part of the story? Remember the priestess at the temple? Well, she disappeared the night of my accident. After 7 days, the day of my funeral, they opened the locked door to her room and found her. She'd been dead for 7 days. They also found a letter from her to me. Writing that letter was the last thing she did. I think she chose to die in my place, Bobby concluded, taking my karma onto herself. I hope to be able to repay her kindness in this life or the next. But you know what? What I want more than anything else is to be able to go back into that light again. And he says, Bobby, that's one hell of a story. I was choked up. You must share it with anyone and everyone you can. Then he smiled conspiratorially. I died again for a second time, but on that occasion for only 2 days. And he gets...
only 2 days.
Yeah. He gets cut off. They have to leave. Oh, and I skipped one thing.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back from the dead, he knew Mandarin. He didn't.
That's when he learned Chinese?
He did not know Chinese before this.
Did that priestess that he saw knew Chinese? No Chinese?
I don't know.
That'd be interesting.
I don't know. That would make sense.
No,
I mean,
no,
no,
it wouldn't make
No.
sense. Come on.
No. Okay, it wouldn't make sense, but
That'd be interesting nonsense.
that would be a nice narrative. I would like it. Yeah, he doesn't end up getting the story about how Bobby died and came back the second time. He ends it though saying, "But I will. There is no question that I will." He's confident that at some point he's going to get to hear Bobby's second story about how he died. But he doesn't get to here. He talks a little bit more about the white wave and the black wave.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I thought was interesting, and I think we had discussed this, maybe not recorded though, about how he referred to them as fields. The words he used was a field of retribution and a field of reward, which I think is like a better way to look at it than heaven or hell. It's just an area where you're paying back or you're getting paid back.
Mm-hmm.
The things that you deserve or the things that you owe.
Mm-hmm.
He also mentions that doing Nei Kung modifies the DNA at some level. And I don't know what that means exactly, but I thought it was interesting. That it actually changes your physiology somehow. Which makes sense if those chords have a physical... Well, yeah, I mean, if it changes your DNA, then that would also mean that it would like change what you pass on, I think. Unless it wasn't one of the things that you pass on. I don't know.
I really think that if you're in a different place in life, you're going to pass on something different to your kids. Like,
yeah.
I really believe that if I sort out more of my issues before I reproduce, my kid's going to have an easier time adjusting to life. And if I'm in like a crazy chaotic place and then just pop one out, like that kid's going to have to take on all of my unsorted issues too. I don't have a rational reason for thinking about that. Just
but it's an
makes
idea.
sense to me.
It's an idea I've heard from different people before that I mean, just on the level of your health, like your health affects. It's not as though you can be like physically unhealthy and then have the same kid as if you were, as if you were very healthy, even though you have sort of the same code. You were still made using the same DNA. There's different epigenetic data that gets passed along on top of the base code itself of the DNA. Yeah. That's a complicated thing. Yeah. I'd love to look into that more.
We'll have to do a DNA book at some point. It'd be sweet.
Yeah. There's mention of the two people that reached level 72. Their names are Bodhidharma. Is that name familiar to you?
Bodhi and Dharma sound familiar, but I don't know about the name.
Oh, yeah, because I'm thinking of, you've talked about bodhisattvas before.
Yeah, I think that's the right word. A bodhisattva is a Hindu term for somebody who reaches enlightenment but chooses to put it off because they'd rather struggle in the chaos of the world and help move everyone forward. Yeah. Than like if you were running a race with a group and everyone was eventually going to get to the finish line, but you found a way to break ahead of the group and get to the finish line first, you can go over the finish line. But if you don't, like if you achieve union with God and you can just transcend struggle, but you decide not to cross the finish line, go back with the group and be a subtle and rejected often influence on other people. That's what the Hindus call a bodhisattva.
Interesting. But Bodhidharma, was an Indian guy. He taught Zen, Buddhism, and Kung Fu at the Shaolin Temple. And that's like what he's mainly known for. The other guy's name was Cheng San Fang. He was the creator of Tai Chi Chuan, which I think is maybe like a school of Tai Chi. The term Tai Chi isn't real clear to me because it's often used for, Tai Chi seems to be a word that's used for people that have compressed yin and yang in their dantian. At that point, you achieve Tai Chi. A lot of these words get used in so many different ways, and there's like schools named after ideas, and so it's all very messy and different. I'm sure that like different schools are just using different words in totally different ways. Yeah.
You mentioned on another episode that one of the original masters of the 72 levels was the founder of the Shaolin Temple, and was like the Grand Master of the Shaolin monks. Which one of those guys was that dude?
So I was wrong. He's not the founder. That's Bodhidharma. He taught Zen Buddhism and Kung Fu at the Shaolin Temple.
Oh, okay.
So he was a part, like an early part of the Shaolin Temple, it sounds like, But it didn't say that he was actually the creator of it. That was a misunderstanding. And then I wanted to touch on the fourth level a little bit more. So if the fourth level, what it is once you've got the dantian full, you've got the 4 strings cut, the next thing is to cut that last string. And apparently what happens is when you cut that last string, your dantian is now like not held in place at all. And that it'll actually like, it falls down towards a different energy center. And I'm probably, what I'm about to say is wrong, but my understanding is that there's something like a separate energy center that's at the root chakra, which is the one that's like at your taint, at the end of the spine, and that stores yin energy. And that what happens is the yang, the ball of yang that is the dantian that now is no longer held in place by a string, it falls down to the yin. Those two things combine, and you have to pull them both back up into place to put them back where the dantian was. And that, it sounds like, is where people die. Like, people have died trying to do that. And it, like, John talked about when he reached that point, it like knocked him unconscious a couple times. He like, it took a few attempts before he was able to actually pull it off.
So then he had to go back and go through a whole process again to get to that point.
I don't
knocks
think
him
so.
out, and then he's got to like go back a couple of levels. Last time he saved game, and
no, because now it's just the yang. The dantian is now just like, I think it's just hanging there. Like, he can feel it on the bottom of his body somehow. But he doesn't have to start over because it's still full and it's still disconnected. So there is no going back from that. It sounds like once those strings are severed, it's not something that you can go back on at all. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then I wanted to talk about the sort of practical advice he gave on meditation and like what the correct way to do that is. And I thought this was really cool because whenever I hear, it's so hard to like get any sort of advice on meditation because different people have different ideas about what that is.
Oh, yeah, it's a mess.
And they're talking about totally different, like just totally two different schools of thought. They're not even got the same aims.
The list of ideas that I have about meditation are a mess, let alone the ideas everyone has about meditation.
Yeah, and so it was interesting to hear this sort of practical way that he views it. So he says that you need to have your spine straight, needs to be straight, and your head, the top of your head should be pointing up, but he says to like maybe tilt your head slightly down, but there should be like something like a straight line from your spine up to your crown chakra. Relaxed shoulders, and you need to focus on your dantian when you're doing the meditation. You should be thinking about the spot where the dantian is, and that doing that is very safe, but that he has seen some cases where people like stop focusing on the dantian and start like putting energy consistently in another place, and like you can kind of hurt yourself that way, or you can, it sounds like you can just stop your progress is what it is if you do that. He mentions that there are like 4 things that have to be kept in mind that need to be balanced in order to achieve meditation correctly. First one's having the body right, which is straight spine, relaxed shoulders. He mentions like the stance specifically. He says that the best way to do meditation, as far as the Mo Pai school of thought, is full lotus. So like crisscross, but with both feet on top of the opposing leg. If you can't do that, that half lotus is the next best thing, which is crisscross, but with just one leg on top of the other. And he says, though, that full lotus is more than twice as effective as half lotus in terms of the energy that you're pulling in and the energy that you're putting in the dantian. If you can't do half lotus, he says, just cross your legs. Just crisscross applesauce. And I thought that was interesting because he talked a little bit about how there's something about like the flow of the full lotus position that makes the energy work better. And it made me think about yoga in a way that I never have before, because I've always thought of yoga as primarily being about balance and about flexibility. But I think it's about energy flow. I think these different positions offer a different sort of flow of energy through your body, and it makes energy move to different parts in different ways. And I think that that's more the point. It's not just about balance and flexibility.
Yeah.
Although, again, yoga is something now that is really, it's really widespread, and there's a lot of different schools of thought on that. So I'm sure that that's not the case for everyone, but it must be that some of the very serious yogis are thinking about like the flow of energy. And the Hindus do have a word for chi. They call it prana. So they're aware of chi. They're aware of energy flow. They just got a different word for it.
Yeah.
The second thing that you need to focus on or the second like sort of factor is emotion. He mentions that when you're trying to meditate, you want to be alert and undisturbed. You want to be focused. You don't want to be really worried about anything at the time. And what you need to do, he says, in order to be consistently meditating well, is you need to be never suppress your emotions and let them flow naturally. Like if you're sad, like really feel sad, and if you're happy, really feel happy, and if you're angry, really feel angry, and don't let those things, don't suppress those things.
Nice.
He mentions that that oftentimes people that follow this, they end up looking kind of crazy because they're like sort of all over the place with their emotions, but that you need that sort of like willingness to just feel those things at the time, so that later when you're trying to meditate, you can actually be undisturbed. Because otherwise you're going to be thinking about that person you're mad at or that thing that hurt your feelings, and those things are going to be creeping into your mind. So you have to be living in an emotionally honest way outside of meditation in order to be a really good meditator.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at least we've retained that sort of wisdom in modern psychology. You know, in therapy, that's something that would be promoted. It's like, if you're mad, just really, really say what you got to say.
Yeah, don't bottle it up. It's bad for you.
Yeah.
And that's so true. It is physically...
It is.
That's one of those things that everyone
mentally
agrees with. It's like physically hurts you to be angry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The third thing you need to think about is, he mentions chi is the third one. Basically what he's saying is the more chi that you have, the better you're going to be able to get into the meditation, which means that at first it's going to be harder, which that's how things work. That's how running works. That's how all kinds of things work. So the more you do it, the more energy you have.
Except for seeing ghosts. Does that work the opposite?
What do you mean?
You're born and you're better at it, and then you later on you suck at it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Or you just pretend you don't see him anymore, I guess.
Anyway.
Yeah, the last thing is mind. He mentions that you need to try and get your mind somewhere in between consciousness and unconscious. You need to be relaxed, but also concentrated. But neither of those things. He's pretty straight up about the fact that like this is really hard to describe. It's really hard to tell somebody like how exactly you should do it. And he mentions that like mantras and visualization are not a big thing with Mo Pai, or like with the practice he's been involved in. But the way he talks about it, it does seem like he happens to think that those are very useful tools. And he doesn't mention that he does or doesn't, but I think he's very careful to not mention what he does exactly because he wants to keep that personal.
Yeah. Does he give any examples of mantras that he would recommend?
No. No, and he doesn't even necessarily recommend them. He's just like, hey, maybe you want to try a mantra or visualization if you think that that would help you.
Yeah.
But he did not mention any specific one.
Cool.
And then he actually gave a little bit of a how-to I wanted to read here.
Nice. I feel like the kind of mantras I would want to use meditating would be like mantras like I am totally concentrated yet totally relaxed and neither. Like I would want to use mantras like that. They kind of break my rationale and get me into that place of oneness that I don't know what religious tradition this originated from, but Alan Watts has talked about questions or riddles that are called quantas or some word like that intentionally have no answer and don't make any sense because they're meant to break you beyond what's purely logical or rational.
Okay. Yeah.
Quantas or quanas or
I don't know that word, but I've heard of that sort of idea though.
Yeah.
Like a riddle that's just meant to make you go, "Oh, fuck, wait, what's going on?"
Right.
Yeah.
To get you to just stop thinking and experience.
Yeah.
Because you can't think it through, but you can experience it. And so that it can get you over that horizon of the rational into the immediate experience.
Yeah.
That can't necessarily be articulated. I feel like that's the kind of mantra is like, I haven't been doing that in meditations, but I'm going to try that out after hearing this. Like,
yeah.
What if you use mantras like that don't make any sense to try to get yourself to that spot?
Yeah, a mantra about like two different opposite things that are really impossible to achieve at the same time. But
right.
It's
like I am totally committed to my commitments and totally unattached. I am both, I am neither.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And it might just break your brain the right way each time to get you where you need to go.
Yeah.
And it does seem like he suggests that if like once you've gotten there, it gets easier to get there. It gets simpler to get back into that headspace again because you know what it is that usually triggers you to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like just practice is a big part of this. You just got to consistently do it and you'll figure something out.
Yeah. And some people are more language thinkers and some people are more visualizers. So I feel like it makes sense for him to not give specific instructions on how to meditate.
Yeah.
Because if you sit down and think about it and you're like, what am I trying to get to in my meditation? What do I need to do to get there? You might be like, oh, I'm going to visualize a still pond. But another person who thinks in more language and less visualizing might say, I'm just going to think of the word peace. I'm just going to focus on that word, or a mantra, or focus on a person that you think is that inspires you to what you're trying to get to. Or
yeah.
It kind of makes sense to me. I don't know if that's why he didn't give instructions, but it seems right to me to not give exactly instructions on it.
Yeah, because he doesn't know you. He doesn't know how your brain works.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that before. Like, I think primarily in words. It's mainly words that are in my head. But you seem to visualize more when you're thinking, right?
I think I visualize a lot, but I don't think I have a very advanced ability to visualize. If I looked out at an audience and I was on stage, and then I closed my eyes and tried to picture where the people were in their faces. I'm not very visually articulate, but I do picture things visually a lot. So I think it's an element of my thought, but I don't think it's my strength. I think more words.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, everybody's different.
And I think about
different degrees of
melodies all the time. Like things are, if there's no music playing and I'm working, I'm humming pretty much all the time. So I don't know what that is, but I feel like there's a musical element to how I think too.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't get those. Huh. But here's what he lists as a simple meditation. Following is a simple practice of meditation that you can easily incorporate into your daily routine. Number 1, sit comfortably in a place where you feel good. You can create such a place in your home by setting aside a spot and keeping it clean. It's better, however, to meditate in nature if you can. A backyard is fine. Wear loose clothing. Try to take a shower before you meditate. Begin with 10 minutes a day and work up to 45 minutes. Early morning or late at night are the best times to practice. Sit comfortably on the ground or floor. Stretch to the right and left your lower back, spine, and neck in a relaxed manner, as shown below. There's some pictures he gives here. Do not force yourself to exceed the natural limits of your body. Simply work gently to make your back, spine, and neck more limber. 4. Keep your back straight and tuck in your chin. Relax your shoulders and concentrate on your dantian. You can follow your breathing if you wish, or use some kind of visual image or mantra to increase your concentration, whatever works for you. Let the thoughts and problems of the day slip from your mind naturally. Don't hang on to them. They will be there for you when you finish. In time, they will readily leave you of their own accord during meditation. Whenever your mind wanders, bring it gently back to your dantian. Remember, concentration is effort, relaxation is action, meditation is to surrender to the infinite inside ourselves. 5. While meditating, don't worry about the act of meditating itself. Don't try to establish beforehand how it will feel. Don't think about images you will see or may see or books you have read about the practice. There is a way to ensure this. Don't talk about your meditation with your friends. Keep it private. If you're discussing with others your experiences in meditation, you are in essence calling attention to yourself and therefore cheating yourself. Don't do it. Keep it real. Keep it personal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then
I want. Do you have any more specific instructions about how to focus on your dantian? Because for me, like not having a context to understand what the dantian even is, I don't even know what to focus on. You know, how would you, if you were going to meditate and focus on your dantian, how would you go about doing that?
Imagine that 4 fingers below your navel, there's a little ball there in the middle of your body, just so like a few inches into you, there's a ball there. Think about that spot. It's just like, think about that physical location, I guess is all I can say. Yeah.
Okay.
That's as much as it's explained, at least. Yeah.
So that's where you would start.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then he also does mention a little bit about stances. One thing he says regarding the sort of like exterior energy flow, if you are always doing full lotus or just always sitting down cross-legged, eventually in the external energy flow, their yang can gather in your legs, and it's not good for you necessarily. Sometimes, he says, once in a while, this is my interpretation, once in a while you're meditating, instead of doing full lotus, do horse stance. So that's just standing and slightly squatting, and that allows for better energy flow through your legs, and there's not going to be energy that gets like stagnated in your legs, because that can be bad for you.
Okay.
I'm not sure the consequences of that, but yeah, it can be bad for you. And I think that's all. I wanted to there's one more thing. We mentioned straw dogs last week. We were talking about straw dogs. I just wanted to share the part that mentioned straw dogs in here.
Sweet.
It's a part from the Tao Te Ching. It says, "Heaven and earth are not humane. They regard all things as straw dogs. Hence the sage is not humane. He regards the common people as straw dogs."
Yeah, and that's Tao Te Ching number 5. That's the one that we read last week.
That was also from Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, and it's just the notion that like if you the way it's sort of discussed in this context, it's a conversation, an argument he's having with a fellow student. But the point, it seems to be that like if you get to a certain level of enlightenment, everything seems not very important. And that's sort of a concept I think about sometimes in regards to like attaining spiritual power, in regards to like something like faith healing. I think of it sometimes in the context of the only way that you can achieve those things is if you can realize that it's not as important as you think it is that there's something bigger, and you have to let go of it being so important before you're allowed to have access to that kind of
putting
power.
a phenomenon on a pedestal makes it unachievable to you.
Right. But once you realize it's less of a big deal, for example, once you realize that this world isn't the only thing that's real,
right,
then
that mastery over this world isn't so staggering to you.
Right. And so then when you achieve it, you don't care as much that you achieved it, because you're not the same person that was aiming to get it to begin with.
I've noticed just at work, as I've been doing sheet metal for a year now, I notice like as I continue working, all of the power tools look smaller, all the ladders don't look as high. You know, everything just gradually feels like it's not as big of a deal. And I realized that sometimes when I'm asked to do something at work for the first time, like soldering, for example, like a really mild type of welding kind of, you know, it's like, oh, that's a torch and that's flames and that's complicated and that's tools I've never used and da-da-da.
Yeah.
But then once I've done it a couple of times, I'm like, oh, I'm about to solder. That's okay. I've done it before. Just the act of overthinking it and I'm overthinking it just because I've never done it before makes it harder, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I've done it before, it's easier to do. So sometimes when I'm asked to do something I've never done before, I try to pretend it's like it's something I've done before. It's like,
yeah,
this is just like all the things I've done before.
Yeah.
In the sense that I don't know how to do it, and I'm gonna in a minute. I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
And it can actually make it easier. I feel like that same kind of shit applies to spiritual things, where you look at something like healing, and it's like, well, if I touch this person's foot and it gets healed, like, I'm not even gonna know how to wrap my mind around the fact that that happened. But if you walk into it like, if this happens, then it's possible. And if it's possible, it's not impressive. Like, this isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
You might be able to do it easier.
Yeah. Knowing that it's not that big a deal, knowing that it is very doable makes it not a big deal.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's everything I wanted to share with the book. Do you have any questions or?
No, I think I'm going to take some of his lessons about meditation.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a question for now, but I'm really curious about, because being a Christian who's interested in the supernatural, I've been wrestling with the question of sorcery versus spiritual gifting so much. And I think there might be some good answers in the way that this guy thinks. Because it seems like him and John Chang are really committed to making their practices selfless and beneficial to others and right in the universally just sense, in the godly righteousness kind of sense. They want to do things that are right. They don't want to take credit for ego. And so when I look at that, I'm like, that's the kind of mindset you should have if you start going into supernatural things, because you can easily go into the supernatural. Like something I'm interested in is going into the spirit world, or astral projecting, or, you know, like Paul said in the Bible, having an experience where he went into a high heaven. And
yeah,
that shit's really interesting to me. But sometimes I'll sit down and I'll be like, I want to try to astral project because I think it'd be sexy if I did, you know? And then I'm like, I should just not. But then other times I'm praying and maybe confessing something I'm feeling guilty about, or maybe asking, like trying to ask God or something higher at least for advice about something. And then I realize deep into the prayer, like, I'm not in my body anymore. And that feels okay.
Really?
But that feels okay. But if I sit down and I'm like, I want to try to leave my body, it's like, what is this, a video game? Get over yourself. Go to bed.
Yeah.
You know? And
totally.
I just haven't figured out exactly how to discern those things. And this book gave me a lot of good food for thought on that.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about like this sort of natural innate power that's being honed here versus sorcery. In Magus of Java, at one point, John is talking to Kosta and Kosta's girlfriend about charices and how those function, and then more broadly foos, which foos are like the notes that you write some sort of intention on, and they seem to work. John's talking about that and how that works, and Kosta's girlfriend kind of objects, and she's like, that sounds an awful lot like sorcery at this point. And John doesn't really seem all that interested in the difference. I don't think that John sees sorcery as an evil thing. I don't think he sees any sort of magic as inherently good or bad. It seems to be about intentions, and it seems to be about like, I mean, I guess certain things would be objectively bad, but that's because you know that, and it's because like you know that if you're making a deal with some kind of demon to get power over other people in exchange for, like, you know that the deal is bad karma, and so you apply that to yourself. And so I think in cases where there is like objectively evil sorcery that's going on, that person, that's reflected in that person's karma. But then that same sort of, like, a foo could be used in some sort of dark way, but it's not the way John's using it. So yeah. John's not tripping about that at all.
I feel he could also take his righteous intentions for granted a little bit, you know, and like, and think that delving into the supernatural or the extrasensory, it just is what it is. It's not evil. But, well, maybe you're just a really good guy and you take that for granted, because there's plenty of people out there that are like, oh yeah, well, I pray to a big monster spirit and he tells me that if I can manipulate this many people into believing this, that he'll give me power in his world when I die. And like, there's people doing so many evil supernatural things.
Yeah.
that they know damn well, you know, maybe they justify it and just say like, well, it is what it is. You know, there is really no good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like it's possible that John could take his good intentions, like assume everybody has decent intentions when they delve into the supernatural.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's all sorts of warfare going on.
Yeah.
People with bad intentions and people with godly intentions.
Yeah, I don't know if John thinks that like there aren't people that are doing. I think John definitely knows that there are people that are doing magic for very bad reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's aware of that. I was gonna say something else.
Well, maybe he just sees it more objectively, like he's just, to use a Nietzschean term, he's beyond good and evil in his state of consciousness, and he can just see how both of them are playing together.
Yeah.
Which can sound extreme, but even in a Christian worldview, we think that the devil asked God permission to torture people. So
Right.
there is a very mature perspective on the interplay between good and evil that can be achieved even in a Christian worldview. So
Yeah.
maybe he's just on a level where he gets why it's happening.
Yeah.
That's why the evil shit's happening, and he doesn't see it as evil from his perspective in the sense that we might, you know, being people that aren't mature enough to not be offended by evil. We are like, oh, there's this warfare going on, and we need to pick the good side. And from where he's sitting, it's just children bickering.
Yeah. Yeah. What I was going to say was that this is not from one of the books, but from an interview I heard with Kosta more recently than these books. And someone asked him about like sort of like the powers that be. They were meaning like the Illuminati. Like, do you think that there are people within the Illuminati that are using these sort of powers to like exert control over others? And what Kosta says is that like he doesn't, because he doesn't think that somebody could, through Mo Pai, reach a high level and still have bad intentions. Like it wouldn't be possible to get there if your mind was like wanted control over other people. That you wouldn't be the at peace person that's capable of doing much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it would make more sense to me if there are righteous people doing good supernatural things that affect the world, and they know why they're doing it, and they're doing it for the right reasons, and it's from a place of understanding. And then there are people who, for the sake of achieving power, naively make themselves the puppets of spirits with bad intentions that use them however they please and promise them things. And so they're not even doing what they're doing for the reasons they think they are. These people that could be on that globalist level, right?
Yeah.
They're carrying out an agenda that they don't understand, which I think is true in good and evil in general. You know, you ask a person who is caught up in evil or negative habits or whatever, you ask them what they're up to and why they're doing it, and they don't know. You know, just like, oh, I'm in this relationship for this and that reason. It's like, oh, you're being completely delusional. You have no idea why you're doing what you're doing. Or like, I did this bad thing to this person, but it's okay because of this. They tell you the reason of their justification doesn't make any sense. And then you ask a good person, you know, what are you doing and why? And they actually understand. I feel like that applies to spiritual warfare. It's like, I don't think that anybody can have a really good understanding of the impact of what they're doing and do something evil. But I think for their own selfish gain, they can get themselves into some stupid situation where a higher entity they're in contact with is using them, and they don't even understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think good comes from understanding, and evil or chaos comes from confusion. And they don't even know what they're doing or why exactly.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely got to be some truth to that. But I do also, I'm also interested in the idea that like maybe people at the very deepest level, they actually know whether the thing they're doing is wrong or right. That if they strip away all their personality and all the cloud that's in between them and like the real truth, that they know what it is, and that maybe that veil gets dropped as you die, and maybe those people really do just sometimes go down thinking that like this was all, everybody was just kind of against me the whole time. This was all bullshit, and everything I did was totally justified. But that maybe when you get to the end, it's like you can't lie to yourself anymore.
I think you can, and I think if you get to the end of your life still justifying all your bullshit, that's when you end up spending some time in the black wave. Because the black wave is a place of total confusion, isolation, and disorientation, or hell or the black wave or whatever. It's like, if you're still bullshitting yourself at the moment that you die, you still got to sit in your bullshit until you can look at it and be honest about it. You don't just have a revelation at the moment that you die and you can see all your bullshit for what it was. Like, you still just carry that in there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the black wave is the veil getting lifted. Maybe it is the revelation. It's just not instantaneous right before you die. It's for decades after you die, slowly. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of the same thing. And
I would think so.
And then maybe you move on when you've reached the truth, when you're actually finally being totally honest with yourself, and then you can move on to God when you're no longer bullshitting yourself.
Yeah.
That could be it.
Because I think there's that being able to admit to yourself exactly how screwed up you are and exactly how accountable you are for how screwed up you are. That's the same thing as like being able to receive God's grace, realizing that if you can give all of that to God, that He will allow you to get a fresh start. Like, if you can just admit it, He'll meet you halfway. Just repent and He'll forgive you. There's something to that, like that idea in a Christian sense or in an Eastern sense. That's like, the more you can accept, the more grace that you can receive. The more you repent, the more you can be forgiven.
Yeah.
You know, the more, and not just repent, but what's that word for admit?
Confess?
Yeah. Yeah, confess. You know? Not, and I don't mean in the ritualistic sense, go confess in a little phone booth in a temple, but confess to God and somebody.
Yeah.
You know?
And that feels a lot like the notion of letting go to this life, of letting go to the stuff that you were worried about, and like you think about ghosts being like unable to move on, that like maybe they're just not ready to let go of whatever lies they keep telling themselves.
Yeah. So NA makes people do the same thing. You have to admit that you can't change without God, and you have to admit everything that you've done wrong, that you feel guilty about, and you have to take accountability for all of those things when possible. Yeah. And that's like people walking into those meetings and they're like ghosts in a black wave, and they walk into that meeting and they're like, okay, I need help. I can't do this. And that's the answer that they get. So it's strangely religious. I would love to do an NA book at some point too, because it's such a strangely religious program. Yeah. I'm thinking about doing the NA text from Sexaholics Anonymous, because I think lust and freedom from lust is an interesting subject. And I think lust in the context of the 12-step process is super interesting.
Also interesting in the context of like Nei Kung practitioners.
Right. They can't bust nuts. Yeah. I read a Buddhist scripture recently that said monks can't bust nuts, but they get a pass if it happens in a dream. That was this specific sect, though. Yeah. I don't know if that's Buddhism as a whole. And the internship I did last year, I didn't bust nuts. So all of these religions, for some reason, are saying, if you stop busting nuts, it does something for your spiritual development. Yeah. And and sex and lust are one of the most addicting things in the world. It'd be an interesting thing to read, like the 12-step process that's admitting you can't change without God's intervention. Yeah. And admitting all the things that you've done wrong, just like the Catholics and Christians say that you need to. Yeah. And then at the end, it's committing to honesty moving forward. The 12-step program even tells you how you should pray, and it's really similar to the Lord's Prayer. It's like we continue to seek God's guidance, praying only that we can carry out God's will, and for whatever we need to carry out God's will. And the Lord's Prayer is like, pray that God will make the earth like His kingdom. So the NA is such a strangely religious program that secular psychologists will refer you to if they can't deal with your addiction, and ignore the fact that they're referring you to a religious practice. Right. It's so interesting.
Because they stay vague enough, and they're willing to say the word universe, and they're willing to say God of your understanding.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But they're still like, okay, the psychologists couldn't get it. What you actually need is God. Yeah. And it's like, yeah. Yeah. Well.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, night school.
Night school.
Good game.
That is it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Evan. Thanks Evan for filming.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks Uptown Theater for the studio.
Yeah. Bye-bye.